In the summer of 1988, Lisa Bennett was just an ordinary teenager enjoying an afternoon with her friends at the local arcade in Greensboro. But when she stepped toward a mysterious new game, she vanished without a trace, leaving her family and an entire town heartbroken and searching desperately for answers. For 18 long years, Lisa's fate remained unknown, her disappearance becoming nothing more than a painful memory until a strange discovery surfaced in an antique store, reigniting a haunting mystery. What truly happened to Lisa Bennett that day? In the charming town of Greensboro, North Carolina, a warm, golden afternoon painted the sky in pastel shades of orange and pink as families enjoyed leisurely strolls. Children pedaled gleefully on their bikes, and teenagers cruised through the streets, radios blasting hits like Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child of Mine and Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up. The town pulsed softly with the rhythm of the late 80s, a blend of carefree spirit and youthful exuberance, captured perfectly by denim jackets, neon-colored accessories, big hairstyles, and flashy sneakers. At the heart of this vibrant atmosphere stood the arcade paradise, a haven for teenagers and kids alike, its windows adorned with glowing neon signs promising excitement and fun. The moment anyone stepped through its doors, the cacophony of electronic bleeps, cheerful jingles, and the laughter and cheers of young patrons enveloped them. Rows upon rows of game cabinets, bright and colorful, invited exploration. In this arcade, amidst the joyous chaos, Lisa Bennett, a spirited 14-year-old with a cascade of curly brown hair framing a face full of wonder and excitement, stood eagerly in front of her favorite Donkey Kong machine. Lisa had an energy that instantly attracted others, a contagious enthusiasm reflected in the brightness of her eyes, and a dimpled smile that never left her lips. By Lisa's side stood her inseparable trio of friends. Jenna, her best friend, a bubbly chatterbox with vivid purple-framed glasses who continuously popped bubblegum. Alex, shy and soft-spoken, nervously adjusting the bill of his worn baseball cap whenever Lisa smiled at him. And Tommy, lanky and perpetually mischievous, known for cracking jokes that effortlessly brought laughter to the group. "Come on, Alex. You can't let Lisa beat you again," Tommy teased, playfully nudging Alex's shoulder as the boy blushed deeply. Alex laughed sheepishly, adjusting his cap once again. "Maybe I'm just being nice, letting her win." Jenna blew a giant bubble before it popped loudly, drawing amused glances from other kids. "Yeah, right. Lisa's the queen of Kong. Nobody beats her." Lisa laughed heartily, her eyes sparkling as she expertly maneuvered Mario to dodge barrels and climb ladders, effortlessly dominating the game. Her fingers danced confidently over the buttons, reflecting hours of joyful practice. The arcade buzzed with youthful exuberance, flashing lights, and exciting electronic sounds. Kids cheered, exchanged high fives, and occasionally argued good-naturedly over whose turn was next. Tommy, losing interest in watching Alex's inevitable defeat, turned to Lisa and pointed toward the far end of the arcade, curiosity brightening his eyes. "Hey, Lisa, did you check out that weird new game yet?" Tommy asked, pointing to a machine nestled mysteriously in a dim corner. Lisa followed his gaze, spotting a peculiar cabinet she hadn't noticed before, its screen flickering invitingly in eerie shades of purple and green. Above the glowing screen was the intriguing title, Night Quest, written in Gothic-style letters, oddly captivating and slightly unsettling. "No," Lisa admitted, curiosity stirring within her. "Is it good?" "Dunno." Tommy shrugged. "Nobody's touched it yet. Looks kinda creepy, doesn't it?" Lisa, ever adventurous, grinned playfully. "Well, I'm not scared. Maybe I'll give it a shot." Before Tommy could reply, Jenna interrupted, grabbing Alex's sleeve. "Hey, we're thirsty. Lisa, we're gonna grab some sodas. You coming?" Lisa shook her head, eyes glued to the mysterious machine. "I'll catch up with you guys. I want to see what this game's about first." The trio moved toward the concession counter, their laughter gradually drowned by the arcade's noise as Lisa approached Night Quest. The machine's dark frame was decorated with strange symbols etched delicately in golden ink, adding to the enigmatic allure. As Lisa placed her hands gently on the joystick and pressed the start button, the screen pulsed hypnotically. Deep, mesmerizing tones emitted softly from hidden speakers, and Lisa felt a strange sensation, a gentle shiver running down her spine, as the pixels formed into mysterious landscapes filled with shadowy figures. Unnoticed by her friends, Lisa was completely absorbed, the world around her fading into insignificance. Meanwhile, in a small house a few blocks away, Lisa's parents, Paul and Martha Bennett, busied themselves preparing a special family dinner. The aroma of roast chicken and fresh vegetables filled the cozy kitchen, complemented by the low hum of the radio softly playing Man in the Mirror by Michael Jackson. Martha, a warm woman with gentle eyes, checked the clock on the wall repeatedly, concern slowly creeping into her expression. Paul, a tall, mild-mannered man, noticed her unease and squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Lisa's probably lost track of time again," he said softly. "You know how she gets when she's at the arcade." Martha smiled nervously. "I know, Paul, but something feels off. She's usually home by now." Minutes ticked slowly into hours. The dinner gradually cooled on the table, untouched, while silence thickened between Paul and Martha, broken only by Martha's repeated glances at the phone, her anxiety steadily rising. Back at Arcade Paradise, Jenna, Tommy, and Alex returned with sodas, laughing and teasing each other about their latest game scores, only to find the space in front of Night Quest empty, Lisa nowhere in sight. "Lisa?" Jenna called out, scanning around, confused. Tommy glanced toward the entrance. Maybe she went home already? Alex frowned nervously, adjusting his cap once more. She wouldn't leave without telling us. After searching the arcade, they found no trace of Lisa. A strange unease crept into the air, dampening their spirits. Finally, they decided she must have simply left early and went home. But Lisa hadn't gone home. Night fell heavily over Greensboro, bringing with it a sense of growing dread that settled painfully into the hearts of Paul and Martha Bennett. The streets grew quiet, lights dimmed one by one, and the arcade locked its doors, darkening completely as if guarding a terrible secret. Paul paced restlessly, glancing through the window every few seconds, his heartbeat echoing loudly in his ears. Martha clutched a photograph of Lisa, her hands trembling, tears threatening to spill as panic tightened its grip around her chest. "I can't wait any longer," Martha whispered finally, her voice thick with worry. Paul nodded gravely, unable to find comforting words. Martha stood slowly, moving toward the telephone that suddenly seemed impossibly heavy. Her breath hitched painfully in her chest as her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitating momentarily. Then, summoning her remaining strength, Martha dialed, the familiar clicking sound deafening in the silence. After what felt like an eternity, the voice of a dispatcher answered calmly. "Greensboro Police Department. How can I help you?" Martha took a deep, shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper as tears streamed silently down her cheeks. "Please, I need your help. My daughter hasn't come home. My daughter disappeared." The night deepened around Greensboro, shadows stretching long and unforgiving across empty streets, carrying with them the weight of a growing mystery, a mystery centered around Lisa Bennett, who had vanished without a trace from the arcade she loved so dearly. As Martha's words echoed painfully through Quiet House, her desperate plea hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty and fear, marking the beginning of a long, dark journey that none of them could have ever imagined. The quiet calm of Greensboro shattered abruptly when two patrol cars, their red and blue lights piercing the night, parked hastily in front of Arcade Paradise. Officers swiftly exited their vehicles, faces taut with urgency. Curious bystanders gathered, their whispers forming an anxious hum as a heavy tension descended upon the town. Detective Robert Nolan, fresh-faced and eager-eyed, stepped confidently onto the sidewalk, adjusting his tie nervously. He had recently joined Greensboro's police department, driven by an earnest determination to help others, a passion he carried from his childhood, inspired by old detective stories and late-night crime dramas. But this was no fiction. This was painfully real. As Nolan entered the arcade, the usually vibrant space felt eerily dark, its neon signs flickering lifelessly in the shadows. Officers searched diligently, flashlights scanning every corner. Nolan approached the arcade manager, Rick Holland, whose normally cheerful expression had faded into deep concern. "Mr. Holland," Nolan began calmly, "I need you to recount exactly what happened today." Rick scratched his shaggy hair nervously. "Detective, Saturdays here are packed. Kids come and go. Honestly, nothing unusual stood out. Lisa Bennett is a regular. Sweet kid, friendly, never caused trouble. And no one saw her leave?" Rick shook his head solemnly. "I've asked around. Nobody remembers seeing Lisa after she went toward the new machine, Night Quest." Nolan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Night Quest?" "Yeah," Rick nodded slowly. "A weird game we got last week. It never drew attention until today." Across the room, Lisa's friends, Jenna, Alex, and Tommy, sat huddled together on a bench, visibly shaken. Jenna, normally bubbly, looked pale, clutching her knees tightly. Nolan approached gently, sensing their anxiety. "Hey guys, I'm Detective Nolan. I know this is tough, but anything you remember might help." Jenna wiped her eyes, voice trembling slightly. "Lisa was playing that strange game, Night Quest. She was just gone. We went for sodas, and she wasn't there when we got back." Alex, nervously twisting his baseball cap, added softly, "Lisa would never leave without telling us. Never." Tommy frowned deeply. It was like she vanished into thin air. No screaming, no fighting, nothing. Nolan sighed quietly, scribbling notes, uncertainty gnawing at him. There was something deeply unsettling here. Meanwhile, Paul and Martha Bennett's anguish grew unbearable. Unable to stay home, they roamed the streets, desperately calling Lisa's name, holding her photo tightly, confronting neighbors and strangers alike. "Have you seen her?" Martha's voice cracked painfully, eyes brimming with despair. "My Lisa, she never came home." Paul, a gentle man hardened suddenly by fear, approached anyone he could, repeating the same desperate question. Each sympathetic shake of the head deepened their agony, their hope dimming slowly like a dying candle. By sunrise, the entire Greensboro community knew Lisa Bennett was missing. Posters bearing her smiling face appeared everywhere, pasted to streetlights, shop windows, and telephone poles. Concerned citizens joined organized searches, combing through local parks, nearby woods, and trails. As hours turned into days, Detective Nolan led extensive searches along the edges of town, particularly near the lake surrounded by thick forest. Volunteers and officers meticulously scoured through bushes, fields, and even abandoned buildings. Divers searched the lake bottom, hoping and fearing simultaneously to find something, anything, that might bring answers. But each day ended as hopeless as the last, leaving Nolan exhausted, overwhelmed, and increasingly frustrated. Media interest initially surged, reporters crowding streets, demanding updates. But as days became weeks without any substantial leads, coverage began dwindling. Arcade Paradise suffered severely from the ongoing negative publicity. Parents forbade their children from visiting, suspecting danger hidden within those walls. Soon, the once thriving arcade stood empty, its joyful atmosphere drained entirely. Under mounting financial and public pressure, Rick Holland announced the closure of Arcade Paradise. Machines were unplugged, lights turned off, doors locked tight. Eventually, the arcade games, including Mysterious Night Quest, were sold in an auction, scattered like forgotten memories. At police headquarters, frustration thickened the air. Detective Nolan, sleepless and consumed by guilt, spent countless nights studying every detail, every interview transcript, every scrap of information, but found only dead ends. Colleagues began gently suggesting he move on to other cases. But Nolan refused, driven by a painful personal vow he'd made to Bennett's. One rainy evening, Nolan visited Paul and Martha at their modest home, feeling each painful second deeply as he faced them. Martha's eyes, sunken and hollow from endless tears, pleaded silently for answers. Paul squeezed his wife's hand gently, holding back his grief, yet unable to hide it completely. Nolan's voice wavered slightly as he spoke. "I'm sorry. We have exhausted every lead. Every clue has vanished. But I promise you I won't stop searching." Martha sobbed quietly, leaning into Paul. "Where could she be, Detective? She's just a child. Our child." Nolan lowered his gaze, aching with their pain. "I don't know, but wherever she is, I swear we won't stop until we find her." Months passed. Nolan, haunted nightly by images of Lisa's smiling face, fought hard against the cold bureaucracy slowly swallowing the case. Media lost interest completely, and soon Lisa Bennett became another tragic story, fading quietly into local legend, a heartbreaking mystery whispered about in sorrowful tones. On a bitterly cold afternoon, Detective Nolan found himself alone in his dimly lit office. Outside, snow gently blanketed Greensboro, muffling the sounds of everyday life. Inside, Nolan stared grimly at Lisa's case file, its edges worn from relentless handling. His fingers brushed the smiling school photograph clipped to the front, a constant reminder of innocence lost, of unanswered questions, of unbearable sorrow. He flipped slowly through pages detailing interviews, searches, and investigative notes. No clues, no evidence, nothing. The harsh reality gripped his heart, tightening painfully, leaving him breathless and defeated. After weeks of resistance, Nolan had finally been ordered to archive the case. Hands trembling slightly, he carefully placed the documents into a cardboard box. Each file felt impossibly heavy, carrying the weight of grief, regret, and failure. The final page, Lisa's photo attached, stared accusingly back at him. Nolan exhaled shakily, shoulders slumped beneath an overwhelming sense of guilt. He spoke softly, voice thick with emotion, as though Lisa herself stood before him, waiting patiently for answers he couldn't provide. "I'm so sorry," Nolan whispered brokenly. "I promised your parents answers, justice, peace. I promised you I'd never stop searching. Yet here we are. No leads, no clues, nothing. I've failed you." His voice cracked painfully, echoing softly in the empty office, a sorrowful confession spoken to no one but his own tormented conscience. Nolan sealed the box, placed it solemnly among countless others, and stepped back slowly, haunted eyes lingering for a painful moment. Turning away from the case felt like betrayal, yet the cruel reality left no choice. The system had forced his hand, the cold bureaucracy indifferent to human heartbreak. He switched off the office light, leaving darkness to envelop Lisa's memory. Yet he knew, deep in his aching heart, that this wouldn't be the end. He'd never truly abandoned Lisa, never silenced the echoes of Martha's heartbreaking sobs or Paul's haunted eyes. The world had moved on, but Nolan couldn't, not completely. He knew, somewhere within himself, that Lisa Bennett's story was unfinished, that Greensboro still guarded secrets beneath its peaceful surface, secrets waiting silently, patiently, in the shadows, to someday reveal themselves. As Nolan stepped out into the gently falling snow, he glanced upward, breathing deeply into the bitter winter air. The cold stung his face, clearing his mind briefly, though never truly easing the ache inside. The case was officially closed, but in Detective Robert Nolan's heart, the search for Lisa Bennett would never end. Greensboro, 2006. The town had changed over the years, growing subtly more modern, yet somehow maintaining its small-town charm. The streets were busier, the cars newer, and music from portable CD players and early-generation iPods replaced the boomboxes and Walkmans of the late 80s. But at its heart, Greensboro was still Greensboro, friendly, calm, and steeped in nostalgia. In the town center, nestled between a quaint coffee shop and a bookstore, was a shop named Timeless Treasures, a peculiar antique store overflowed with eclectic items from different eras. Visitors entering were immediately greeted by the chime of a rusty bell, followed shortly by the eccentric proprietor. Mr. George Calloway, a slender older man with round glasses, wispy white hair, and a quick, playful wit that charmed every customer. On a sunny morning in early autumn, a young couple, Michael and Emily Turner, stepped curiously into timeless treasures. Emily, bubbly and talkative, instantly marveled at vintage porcelain dolls and delicate china, while Michael, more reserved, gravitated toward old electronics and antique clocks. "Welcome, young adventurers," George declared theatrically, adjusting his glasses dramatically. "You've just stepped back in time, so be careful not to change history." Emily laughed, delighted by George's whimsical demeanor. "Anything special you'd recommend?" George smiled mischievously, rubbing his hands together. "Depends on your definition of special." Michael wandered deeper into a cluttered maze of items, eyes scanning the shelves, when he suddenly paused. Half hidden behind a dusty old jukebox and beneath a stack of vinyl records, an arcade cabinet caught his eye. Intrigued, he approached cautiously. "What's this?" Michael called out, pulling aside clutter to reveal the arcade machine screen. It was dark and dusty, covered in cobwebs, its paint chipped and faded. The name Night Quest was barely visible in peeling, Gothic lettering. George scratched his head thoughtfully. "Oh, yes, that old relic. Purchased it from an auction years ago, but it's never been plugged in. Honestly forgot I even had it." Michael, fascinated, brushed dust away gently. "Does it work?" George shrugged cheerfully. "Well, there's one way to find out." Curiosity sparked. Michael plugged in the arcade machine. With a low electronic hum, the screen flickered weakly to life, pixels shimmering faintly. Emily stepped closer, intrigued. The screen darkened momentarily, then suddenly lit up with bright letters, clear and unmistakable. "Help!" Emily shivered, her voice uneasy. Is it supposed to say that?" George frowned curiously, pushing up his glasses. "Certainly not." "How odd." Within hours, the strange message caught the attention of local police. Officers soon realized the arcade machine was connected to Lisa Bennett's unsolved disappearance from 1988. With the discovery quickly spreading through town, whispers of the mysterious case resurfaced, reigniting memories many had tried to forget. At their home, Paul and Martha Bennett sat quietly, older now, their faces etched deeply by time and grief. They had never truly moved past losing Lisa. Hearing the news brought emotions flooding back with painful clarity. Martha clasped Paul's hand tightly, her voice trembling. Could this be it, Paul? Could we finally have answers? Paul, eyes misted, whispered softly, "Maybe, Martha. Maybe finally we'll know." With renewed urgency, the Greensboro Police Department reopened the case, bringing back retired Detective Robert Nolan to assist. Nolan, now in his 50s, retained his characteristic determination, his silver hair and deep-set eyes revealing a lifetime of unresolved burdens. But age had not robbed him of his humor and warmth, qualities immediately noticeable when introduced to his new partner, young Detective Sarah Woods. Sarah, tech-savvy and energetic, approached Nolan with eager excitement. She was in her late 20s, quick-witted, fiercely intelligent, and with an endless passion for old mysteries. "Detective Nolan," she greeted, extending her hand enthusiastically. "I'm honored. I've studied your cases. You're kind of a local legend." Nolan chuckled lightly, shaking her hand. "Please, legend? Makes me feel ancient. Just call me Nolan." Sarah smiled brightly, eyes glinting playfully. "Well, Nolan, ready to solve the mystery?" "Been waiting 18 years, Nolan replied warmly. "Let's see what we got." Together, the pair carefully examined the arcade machine in the evidence room. Nolan watched in amazement as Sarah effortlessly navigated the complex inner circuitry, her fingers dancing swiftly across the keyboard of her laptop. "So, Woods, you're a tech wizard, huh?" Nolan teased gently. Sarah smirked, eyes glued to her screen. "Just doing my magic, old-timer." Nolan chuckled, watching as rows of strange data flowed onto Sarah's screen. She paused suddenly, eyes narrowing in confusion. What's wrong? Nolan leaned forward. There's encrypted code embedded here, she explained slowly. Whoever programmed this game was hiding something. Can you crack it? Sarah's fingers flew once again, nodding confidently. Give me a bit of caffeine and some patience. I'll figure out. As Sarah worked tirelessly, Nolan dug into old case files, rediscovering familiar names and faces. One name stood out clearly: Rick Holland, former owner of Arcade Paradise. His previous testimony had been straightforward, but Nolan felt a renewed urgency to question him again years later. Meanwhile, Sarah deciphered part of strange data, discovering disturbing hints, references to hypnosis experiments and cryptic phrases like deep memory implantation. Sarah shared her findings with Nolan, who felt dread tighten around his chest. This isn't just a game, Sarah explained nervously. It's a psychological experiment disguised as entertainment. But why Lisa? Nolan wondered aloud, feeling the weight of unanswered questions pressing heavily upon him. Driven by growing suspicion, Nolan decided to confront Rick Holland again. Together, Nolan and Sarah drove across town toward Rick's modest house. Outside, Nolan paused briefly, memories swirling through his mind. Sarah noticed his hesitation, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. You okay? Nolan offered a weary smile. Just ghosts from the past. Taking a deep breath, he knocked firmly on Rick's door. After a tense moment, Rick Holland appeared, older, gray-haired, eyes reflecting surprise and mild concern at Nolan's sudden appearance. Detective Nolan, Rick greeted cautiously. It's been a long time. Didn't think I'd see you again. Nolan fixed Rick with a serious gaze, his voice firm yet composed. We need to talk, Rick. Rick shifted uneasily, attempting a casual tone. About what exactly? Nolan stepped closer, his voice steady and authoritative. We need to talk about Lisa Bennett. Rick visibly paled, the name striking deeply, his eyes widening slightly in nervous apprehension. Nolan's steady gaze never wavered, sending a clear message. This time, there would be answers. And as Rick reluctantly stepped aside to let them in, Nolan knew deep within him. They had reopened more than just a case. They had opened the doorway to a past that refused to stay buried, a past that would not rest until it finally surrendered its darkest secrets. Rick Holland's living room was modest, but surprisingly welcoming. Old rock posters hung on the faded walls, and vintage arcade collectibles cluttered shelves, each one preserving memories of better times. Rick himself appeared uneasy but masked it with casual indifference as Nolan and Sarah settled into worn armchairs. Nice place you've got here, Rick, Nolan remarked dryly, glancing at an old Pac-Man figurine. You kept souvenirs from your glory days. Rick smirked, folding his arms. Those weren't exactly glory days, detective. More like a nightmare disguised in neon lights. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Why call a nightmare? Rick chuckled, a trace of bitterness slipping into his tone. You try running an arcade after a kid vanishes without a trace. Parents call me the Pied Piper of Greensboro. Nolan studied Rick closely, sensing something hidden beneath the sarcasm. Let's talk about Lisa Bennett. Last time, you said you barely noticed her. Is that still true? Rick's face tightened. Lisa was a regular. Nice kid, smiled a lot, but that's all I knew. Like I said then, detective, I didn't see her leave. Convenient, Nolan remarked, holding Rick's gaze. So why did the arcade close? Rick sighed deeply, running fingers through his thinning hair. Customers vanished quicker than you could blink. Rumors spread fast. Folks believed Arcade Paradise was cursed, haunted, you name it. Banks refused loans. Investors pulled out. I had no choice but to shut down. Sarah interjected gently. And the machines, especially Night Quest? Rick hesitated, eyes shifting nervously. Got rid of them at auction. Night Quest never felt right to me. Bought it from a sketchy programmer, Oliver Carter, I think. The name startled Nolan, something long buried surfacing in his memory. Oliver Carter? Tell us more. Rick shrugged, leaning back. Quiet guy. Weird obsession with psychology and gaming. He said Night Quest was revolutionary, groundbreaking. Turns out it was bad luck in a wooden box. Where can we find Oliver now? Sarah pressed. Rick laughed dryly, shaking his head. If you can find him, you'd be the first. Disappeared weeks before Lisa. Police looked briefly, figured he'd skipped town. Nolan frowned deeply, feeling the old frustration creeping back. Why didn't you tell us this before? Rick sighed, eyes weary. Nobody asked the right questions. And frankly, nobody believed me anyway. Nolan and Sarah exchanged a look, silently agreeing they'd gotten all they could from Rick. Standing slowly, Nolan nodded. Thank you, Rick. We'll be in touch. Rick smiled faintly, humor laced with sadness. Careful digging around old graves, detective. Sometimes the dead don't stay buried. Leaving Rick's house, Nolan felt uneasy. Sarah noticed his troubled expression as they walked back to their car. Oliver Carter, Sarah pondered aloud, breaking the silence. You remember that name? Vaguely, Nolan admitted quietly. The department never pursued it seriously. Sarah smiled softly. Maybe it's time we change that. The duo returned to the precinct, combing meticulously through dusty archives and forgotten records. Hours passed unnoticed as they searched for Oliver Carter's files, sorting through aging documents filled with fading ink. Sarah tapped her laptop keys rhythmically, determined and focused. Suddenly, she raised an eyebrow, triumphant. Got something. Nolan. Oliver Carter lived in Greensboro from 86 to 88. Single, eccentric, known for bizarre theories about gaming psychology. Nolan leaned in eagerly. Any criminal records? Nope, Sarah said, squinting at the screen. But missing persons report, filed 2 weeks before Lisa vanished. Nolan frowned, disturbed. Could Carter's disappearance and Lisa's case be connected? Coincidences aren't my style, Sarah replied lightly. Let's see who remembers him. Over the following days, Nolan and Sarah visited locals, seeking those who remembered Oliver Carter. Most shook their heads politely, barely recalling the quiet programmer. But one afternoon, inside a coffee shop frequented by former arcade staff, Nolan and Sarah met Stanley Cooper, a quiet, middle-aged man who once worked as a technician at Arcade Paradise. Stanley sipped coffee nervously, glancing cautiously around the cafe. Oliver Carter? Yeah, I remember him clearly. Strange guy, always scribbling notes about people's reactions to games. Reactions? Sarah prompted curiously. Stanley nodded anxiously, obsessed with how games influence minds, emotions, even subconscious behaviors. It gave me the creeps. Nolan leaned forward seriously. Did he say anything unusual about Night Quest? Stanley hesitated, voice dropping slightly. He called it his masterpiece, claimed it could blur reality and imagination. Something about subliminal control. Thought he was crazy, honestly. Sarah took notes swiftly, intrigued. Where did Oliver usually work? He rented a warehouse by Lake Gibson, Stanley explained, glancing nervously again. Rarely left it, always secluded. He disappeared abruptly. Police barely searched it. Nolan exchanged a determined glance with Sarah. Can you give us directions? Stanley nodded slowly, scribbling directions hastily onto a napkin, handing it over with a nervous glance. Be careful, okay? That place felt wrong. Leaving Stanley, Nolan, and Sarah discussed the new leads excitedly, anticipation buzzing between them. Think Oliver experimented on Lisa? Sarah asked thoughtfully, staring out at Greensboro's busy streets. Nolan sighed deeply, troubled. I hope not, but we need to see that warehouse. They reached Lake Gibson as twilight settled softly over the landscape, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the deserted warehouse. Overgrown weeds covered its rusty doors, and broken windows reflected the moonlight ominously. Nolan stepped forward cautiously, feeling his heart race as Sarah carefully pushed open the creaking door. The interior smelled damp and stale, thick with the scent of forgotten things. Sarah flipped on her flashlight, illuminating dust-covered equipment, scattered papers, and old computer terminals. Moving slowly, Nolan discovered notebooks filled with cryptic writings, complex diagrams, codes, and alarming statements about psychological manipulation. Sarah sifted through documents, brow furrowed anxiously. "Nolan," she whispered, handing him faded photographs depicting teenagers hooked to strange wires, expressions blank. His breath caught painfully. This looks like Oliver's experiments." Sarah's voice tightened anxiously. "Think Lisa was among them?" Before Nolan could answer, Sarah's flashlight illuminated a wall plastered with yellowed news clippings, articles about Lisa's disappearance, Arcade Paradise's closure, and Oliver Carter's own missing case. Nolan stared numbly, recognizing obsessive handwriting scribbled frantically over them. She reacted differently. Too strong, can't control. Had to hide the mistake. Nolan's chest tightened painfully. Lisa was his mistake. Sarah swallowed hard, sensing Nolan's anguish. "We need answers. Oliver's secrets might still be here." Suddenly, Sarah's flashlight beam caught something shimmering faintly behind stacked boxes. Approaching carefully, Nolan moved the boxes aside, revealing a small metal key labeled simply, "Night Quest, Emergency Override." They exchanged a stunned look. "What's an emergency override?" Sarah asked, bewildered. "Only one way to find out," Nolan replied solemnly, pocketing the key. "But something tells me Oliver planned for everything, even failure." Sarah nodded, eyes serious. Oliver knew he'd eventually be discovered. So where's Lisa? Silence filled the warehouse, heavy with unanswered questions. Moments later, Sarah noticed another corridor extending deeper into darkness. Exchanging determined glances, they stepped carefully forward, their footsteps echoing softly against bare concrete. Ahead, an old metal door stood slightly ajar. Nolan pushed it slowly, hinges protesting loudly, revealing an eerie room lit faintly by moonlight filtering through cracked windows. Inside, amid scattered equipment and broken arcade parts, something reflected softly, metallic, half hidden beneath debris. Nolan's pulse quickened. "Sarah, do you see that?" She nodded silently, approaching slowly, heart pounding. Clearing debris carefully, she uncovered something astonishing, a small silver locket, tarnished yet still gleaming. With trembling fingers, Nolan opened it, heart nearly stopping as Lisa Bennett's smiling face stared gently back at him. A silent promise passed between Nolan and Sarah as they stood frozen, haunted by Lisa's innocent smile, a promise that the past would finally yield its long-hidden secrets, no matter the cost. The old warehouse stood still beneath a thick veil of darkness, moonlight barely filtering through cracked windows. Shadows danced on the walls, and every step Nolan and Sarah took echoed like whispers of ghosts long forgotten. Their flashlights sliced weakly through the gloom, revealing tangled wires, shattered monitors, and faded arcade posters, remnants of an eerie past. Sarah felt her heart thudding heavily. She glanced at Nolan, whose tense expression mirrored her anxiety. Neither spoke. Their silence said everything. Slowly, carefully, they moved deeper into the warehouse, dust swirling in beams of pale light. At the far end, Nolan halted abruptly, eyes narrowing. Ahead stood a heavy metal door, partially obscured by rusted shelves. Pushing aside old machinery with a scraping noise that sent chills down their spines, he uncovered the entrance to a small hidden office. Nolan nudged the door open gently, its hinges groaning softly. Inside, the room was cramped and musty, the air thick with mildew. Stacks of yellowed documents lay scattered haphazardly over a battered desk. Shelves lining the walls were cluttered with tapes, VHS cassettes labeled hastily in faded handwriting. Sarah stepped forward cautiously, picking up one of the tapes marked simply, "Test subject number 3, Lisa B." Her breath caught painfully in her throat. Nolan, her voice trembled. He moved quickly, understanding instantly. They exchanged a heavy glance, emotion swelling silently between them. Nolan took the tape from her carefully, staring at Lisa's name with deep anguish. "We need to see this," he whispered solemnly, voice thick with dread and anticipation. At that instant, a loud metallic clang shattered their tension. Nolan spun sharply, hand instinctively moving to his hip. Sarah's flashlight beam darted frantically toward the sound, revealing the outline of someone moving swiftly near the exit. "Hey!" Nolan shouted, stepping forward decisively. "Stop right there." The intruder bolted toward the darkness, clutching stolen documents tightly. Nolan gave chase, Sarah close behind, adrenaline surging through their veins. The stranger sprinted frantically, knocking over crates in an attempt to slow them down. Nolan leaped over scattered debris, heart pounding, determined not to lose him. "Police, stop." Nolan's voice echoed forcefully. He lunged, grabbing the intruder's arm, wrestling violently amid desperate struggles. Sarah jumped forward, tackling him from behind, sending all three crashing to the ground. Documents flew into the air, scattering across the filthy floor. "Enough!" Nolan growled, subduing the man beneath him. "Who are you?" The intruder, a ragged-looking man in his 50s, gasped, struggling weakly. Nolan flipped him onto his back, illuminating his terrified face. It was Stanley Cooper, the former arcade technician they'd interviewed earlier. His eyes filled with fear, he babbled frantically. I can't let you find out." "He'll know he'll find me." Sarah knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder firmly. "Stanley, calm down. Who will find you?" Stanley trembled, shaking violently. "Oliver, he's alive. He watches everything. I warned you not to dig deeper." Nolan stared grimly, his mind spinning. "Oliver Carter's alive?" Stanley sobbed weakly, eyes filled with panic. "He knows you found the warehouse. He won't stop now." Nolan exchanged a tense look with Sarah. "Take him to the station. I'll handle the tapes." Sarah nodded firmly, escorting a shaken Stanley toward their car. Nolan returned quickly, gathering scattered VHS tapes and documents, carrying the haunting label Lisa B. Later that evening, inside Greensboro Police Headquarters, Nolan and Sarah stood anxiously beside Paul and Martha Bennett. A heavy silence filled the small viewing room. Martha held Paul's hand tightly, eyes red from tears. Nolan gently inserted the tape into the VHS player, pressing play with trembling fingers. The screen flickered weakly, grainy footage appearing. Oliver Carter's face loomed large, thin and gaunt, eyes filled with obsession as he spoke feverishly into the camera. "Subject number 3 responding exceptionally," he muttered, eyes wild. The footage panned to Lisa, her youthful face pale and vacant, sitting motionless in front of Night Quest. Martha gasped, covering her mouth, tears streaming uncontrollably. Paul stiffened, eyes glued helplessly to his daughter's silent image. On screen, Oliver adjusted wires attached to Lisa's temples. She didn't react, her vacant gaze hauntingly empty. Memory implantation successful. Subject under complete subconscious influence. Oliver's voice echoed coldly, but unforeseen resistance. Need relocation. The footage shifted abruptly. Lisa was slumped over, unconscious, as Oliver carried her toward the warehouse exit, muttering frantically, "Too dangerous. Must dispose, cover tracks." The tape ended abruptly, plunging the room into unbearable silence. Martha sobbed softly, collapsing into Paul's embrace. Nolan stood frozen, overwhelmed by guilt and sorrow. Paul turned painfully, voice breaking with emotion. Where did he take our Lisa?" Nolan swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. "The lake. Lake Gibson, I'm sure of it." Hours later, guided by the haunting footage, Nolan and Sarah arrive at the shoreline of Lake Gibson. Moonlight shimmered softly across the still water, an eerie calm masking the tragedy beneath. A small boat awaited them, gently swaying at the dock. Nolan stared grimly ahead, haunted by thoughts of Lisa's innocence, now shattered forever. Sarah touched his shoulder softly. "You okay?" Nolan sighed deeply, eyes weary. "I promised them answers, Sarah. All I gave them was heartbreak." She shook her head gently. "You're giving them closure. That matters." Nolan met her gaze, gratitude evident. Together, they boarded the boat, lanterns illuminating the darkness around them. They drifted silently across the lake, searching carefully, eyes scanning anxiously for anything unusual. Oliver couldn't have gone far, Sarah reasoned quietly. He'd need to move quickly. Nolan nodded thoughtfully, gaze fixated on the lake's surface. He panicked, tried to hide her fast. That usually means mistakes. Suddenly, something glinted softly beneath the water, catching Nolan's attention. His pulse quickened instantly. "Sarah, look there." She followed his gaze anxiously, breath hitching sharply. Beneath the surface lay something metallic, glimmering faintly under lantern light. Without hesitation, Nolan leaned over carefully, reaching down into the cold water, fingers straining to grasp it. Finally, he secured a firm grip, pulling upward forcefully. Sarah helped steady him, both hearts racing anxiously. The object emerged slowly, a rusted metal briefcase, its surface encrusted by years underwater. They exchanged a stunned look, Nolan's voice barely audible with anticipation. "Oliver's secret stash?" Sarah's eyes widened hopefully. "Maybe our final answers." As they carefully placed the case into the boat, a profound silence enveloped them. The lake's surface became still again, reflecting a moon now hidden partially behind clouds, as if reluctant to witness the pain of long-buried truths finally surfacing. Nolan exhaled shakily, hand resting protectively on the briefcase. He knew the secrets locked inside could shatter Greensboro once more. Yet, they deserved the truth, all of them. Turning to Sarah, his voice steady yet filled with quiet determination, Nolan whispered firmly, "It's time the world finally learns exactly what happened to Lisa Bennett." And beneath the quiet darkness of Lake Gibson, Nolan silently vowed he wouldn't rest until Lisa's story found its rightful conclusion, even if it meant facing horrors Greensboro desperately wished to forget. Dawn broke slowly over Lake Gibson, casting a muted golden glow over its dark, mirror-like surface. An uneasy stillness hung in the air, interrupted only by the murmured voices of police officers, divers, and onlookers who had gathered along the shore. The news spread quickly through Greensboro, reviving memories buried for nearly 2 decades. Robert Nolan stood silently at the edge of the lake, hands thrust deep in his pockets, watching divers prepare to retrieve what lay hidden beneath the waters. Beside him, Sarah Wood stood quietly, eyes fixed on the lake, her usually lively expression somber, respectful. Neither spoke, but their silence communicated a shared understanding, the painful truth they were about to face. Minutes later, a diver emerged from the murky depths, signaling to the crane operators. Chains strained and metal groaned as the lake slowly surrendered its terrible secret. From beneath the surface rose a rusted mud-caked car, water pouring from every opening. The sight was surreal, horrific, heartbreaking, yet undeniably real. Sarah glanced anxiously at Nolan, who clenched his jaw tightly. He knew instantly this was Oliver Carter's car. His heart ached for Paul and Martha Bennett, who stood just behind him, their faces pale with dread, desperately clinging to one another. Paul's voice shook slightly. Is she in there?" Nolan turned slowly, nodding softly, eyes heavy with sorrow. "We'll know soon." Investigators gently opened the vehicle, handling each movement with painstaking care. Time slowed unbearably as the coroner gently removed skeletal remains. Martha sobbed softly, burying her face in Paul's chest. Nolan's throat tightened painfully. He moved toward them, voice barely audible. "I'm so deeply sorry," he whispered, emotion thickening his words. "We'll bring her home now." Paul, Trembling, nodded tearfully. "Thank you, Detective." Days later, official confirmation arrived. Lisa Bennett's remains had finally been found. Though unbearably painful, Paul and Martha experienced a profound sense of closure. At last, their daughter would rest peacefully. In the days following the discovery, Nolan and Sarah meticulously reconstructed the tragic events of Lisa's final moments, guided by evidence from Oliver's briefcase, Lisa's locket, and testimonies. Slowly, the heartbreaking narrative emerged clearly. On that fateful evening in 1988, Oliver Carter had taken Lisa from Arcade Paradise in a state of induced trance, his experiment spiraling dangerously out of control. But as he drove toward Lake Gibson, intending to conceal his failure, Lisa woke abruptly, terrified and disoriented, struggling desperately. Panic overwhelmed Oliver, who lost control of the car. It careened violently off the road, plunging deep into the lake. Oliver, escaping the sinking car in chaos and confusion, vanished, leaving Lisa tragically trapped inside. Detectives Nolan and Sarah are devastated after confirming Lisa's tragic fate. Greensboro unites for an emotional funeral, where Lisa's parents finally lay her to rest, and her childhood friend Alex leaves his old cap on her grave in a tender farewell. Later, Nolan and Sarah reflect on justice and closure, just as a call reveals Oliver Carter has been spotted alive in Winston-Salem. Realizing the case isn't over, they vow to pursue him and ensure true justice for Lisa.